Senior Inspector Raxtalia stood at the viewport of her diplomatic shuttle, her iridescent scales dulling slightly as Earth's harsh sun beat down through the reinforced glass. The planet below looked deceptively peaceful from orbit, swirls of white clouds over vast brown expanses. She knew better. This was a death world, a planet that should have been impossible to evolve intelligent life. Final approach to Death Valley Combat School, announced the shuttle's eye. External temperature, 48.9 degrees Celsius. Warning. Conditions exceed recommended safety parameters for Class 3 species. Behind her, the other 5 members of her inspection team shifted uncomfortably in their environmental suits. All of them were decorated officers from the most advanced civilizations in the Galactic Federation. All of them fought this assignment beneath them. Remind me again why the Federation Council is making us waste time with primitive Deathworlders. Commander Zixtal's crystalline form sparkled with irritation. These humans barely achieved spaceflight a century ago. Because, Raxtalia replied, her tail twitching in mild annoyance, those primitive Deathworlders have the highest survival rate of any species in extreme conditions. The Council wants to know why. The shuttle touched down with a gentle thud, and immediately their environmental suits began pinging warnings about the external temperature. Through the shuttle's windows, Raxtalia could see a group of humans waiting on the landing pad. They weren't wearing any protective gear, just light fabric covering their skin. By the void, breathed Lieutenant Kavor, his fungal patches darkening with stress. They're standing in direct sunlight without protection. The shuttle door opened, releasing a blast of superheated air that made everyone's environmental suits kick into overdrive. A young human female stepped forward, her dark hair pulled back tightly, skin glistening with what Raxtalia recognized as their cooling mechanism called sweat. Welcome to Death Valley Combat School. I'm Cadet Commander Sarah Chen. The human's mouth curved into what they call a smile, showing far too many teeth. You're about to discover why humans are the galaxy's best survival instructors. Raxtalia's translator caught the murmured comments from her team. She's barely mature. This must be a joke. We're senior officers, not students. With all due respect, Cadet Commander, Raxtalia began, her scales shifting to diplomatic blue. We are here to evaluate your training methods, not participate in them. My team consists of the Federation's most experienced. Your environmental suits have about 30 minutes of power left. Chen interrupted, checking a primitive mechanical timepiece on her wrist. The nearest shelter is 4 hours away on foot, and there's a sandstorm coming in from the west. She gestured to the horizon, where dark clouds were gathering. So, Senior Inspector, would you like to start evaluating our methods now? Raxtalia's inner eyelids blinked rapidly. You can't be serious. These conditions are lethal for Class 3 species without protection. Funny thing about that classification system, another human cadet stepped forward. His name tag read Rodriguez. It assumes technology is the answer to everything. We're here to teach you otherwise. As if on cue, Raxtalia's suit emitted a warning chirp, power reserves dropping faster than expected due to the extreme heat. Around her, the other officers' suits were doing the same. Impossible. Commander Zixtal's crystalline form vibrated with anger. This is a violation of 17 different safety protocols. Welcome to Hell Week. Chen's smile grew wider. Lesson 1. Protocols don't keep you alive. Adaptation does. She pulled several fabric bundles from a nearby crate. These are what we call desert survival kits. Primitive by your standards, but they've kept humans alive in these conditions for thousands of years. You expect us to abandon our suits. Lieutenant Kavor's fungal patches were now completely black with stress. No, Chen replied, already walking toward the growing darkness on the horizon. I expect you to survive. Whether you keep the suits on as they fail or learn to adapt, that's your choice. But you might want to decide quickly. That storm's going to hit in about 10 minutes. Raxtalia looked at her team, then at the approaching storm, then at the maddeningly calm human cadets. Her scales shifted to decision-making purple, Everything in her training told her this was insanity. Everything in her instincts told her this was exactly why the Council had sent them. "Team," she announced, her claws already working at her suit's seals. "Prep for emergency survival conditions." As her suit's cooling system gave one final whir and died, the hot air hit her scales like a physical blow. But the humans were still standing, still smiling, still alive. "Smart choice," Chen nodded approvingly. "Now, who wants to learn how to make a shelter out of sand?" As the storm approached and her team struggled with their own suits, Raxtalia realized this evaluation mission was going to be very different from anything they'd expected. The humans weren't just teaching survival techniques. They were about to demonstrate why they'd earned their reputation as the galaxy's most adaptable species. And judging by the glint in Cadet Commander Chen's eyes, this was only the beginning. The sandstorm hit like a plasma blast, turning the world into a howling orange void. Raxtalia's scales burned as tiny particles worked their way between them, her inner eyelids working overtime to protect her vision. Around her, her team was in various states of distress. Commander Zixtal's crystalline form vibrating dangerously in the wind, Lieutenant Kavor's fungal patches completely black with terror. "Stop thinking like officers and start thinking like survivors." Cadet Rodriguez's voice cut through the storm. He demonstrated how to wrap the primitive fabric, something called a shime, around their faces. "The sand isn't your enemy, it's your shelter." Cadet Commander Chen was already in motion, showing them how to create a depression in the lee of a dune. "Your bodies know how to survive. Your minds are what's getting in the way. Watch and learn." The humans moved with practiced efficiency, using their bare hands to sculpt the sand into protective barriers. What looked like chaos to the alien officers clearly followed a pattern, one that had kept humans alive in these conditions for millennia. "Impossible." Commander Zixtal's voice crackled through his failing suit speakers. "My crystalline structure will shatter in these temperature variations." "Then adapt," Chen shouted back. "Your molecular structure can flex if you let it, just like we do." To Raxtalia's amazement, she was right. As their environmental suits failed one by one, each officer discovered capabilities they never knew they had. Kavor's fungal patches, initially blackened with stress, began producing a protective coating that blocked the worst of the sand. Zixtal's crystalline form, rather than shattering, developed microscopic fissures that actually made him more flexible. "That's it," Rodriguez encouraged, helping them deepen their shelter. "Your bodies evolved from worlds just as harsh as ours. You've just forgotten how to use those adaptations." Hours passed in a blur of sand and sweat. The humans taught them to read the wind, to find pockets of breathable air in the storm, to use the very forces trying to kill them as tools for survival. When Raxtalia's translator finally failed, she discovered she could communicate through a combination of gesture and instinct that transcended species. "Next phase," Chen called out as the storm began to intensify. "We need to move to higher ground. The valley's about to flood." "Flood?" Lieutenant Kavor's translator sputtered. "In a desert." As if in answer, a distant roar joined the howl of the wind. Flash flood, another deadly aspect of this death world that the humans had learned to predict and survive. "Form teams of 3. Rodriguez commanded. "Raxtalia, your scales can detect pressure changes. You're our early warning system. Zixtal, your crystalline form can reflect light. You're our beacon. Kavor, your fungal patches can absorb moisture. You're our water source." For the first time, Raxtalia understood. The humans weren't just teaching survival. They were teaching them to rediscover abilities their species had buried under layers of technology and civilization. They moved through the storm like a single organism, each using their natural abilities in ways their advanced training had never considered. When the flood hit, they were ready. The humans showed them how to create elevated platforms using debris and natural formations, how to anchor themselves against the combined fury of wind and water. "This is what we mean by adaptation," Chen shouted over the chaos, her face covered in sand, but her eyes bright with excitement. Your bodies are just as amazing as your technology, maybe more so. As night fell and temperatures plummeted, creating a new survival challenge, Raxtalia watched her team. Commander Zixtal was using his crystalline form to amplify the faint starlight, creating illumination. Kavor's fungal patches were sharing stored moisture with others. Each of them had discovered something profound about themselves. "Tell me, Senior Inspector," Chen asked as they huddled in their reinforced shelter, the storm still raging outside. "Still think we're just primitive Deathworlders?" Raxtalia's scales shifted to a color she hadn't used in years, one that indicated profound respect. "No, Cadet Commander. I think you're something far more dangerous. Your teachers." Chen's smile was visible even in the darkness. "Good. Because tomorrow we learn how to hunt sandworms. And trust me, you haven't seen anything yet." As her team settled in for the night, using their body's natural abilities to share warmth and resources, Raxtalia realized the Council had been right to send them. But not to evaluate the humans, to learn from them. These primitive Deathworlders had maintained a connection to their evolutionary advantages that more advanced species had lost. And this was only day one. Dawn broke over Death Valley like a plasma torch, painting the canyon walls in shades of blood and gold. Raxtalia stood at the edge of a massive gorge, her scales automatically shifting to reflect the intense heat. Behind her team was busy practicing their newly discovered abilities. Abilities they'd never known they possessed until their technology had been stripped away. "Today's challenge is simple," Cadet Commander Chen announced, standing casually near the cliff edge without any safety equipment. "We're going to traverse Dead Man's Canyon, 10 miles of the most treacherous terrain Earth has to offer, without climbing gear." Commander Zixtal's crystalline form sparkled with concern. He had adapted remarkably well to the environment, but vertical climbs were different from desert survival. "Oh, we have climbing gear," Cadet Rodriguez grinned, dropping a bundle of ropes and primitive metal devices, "just not the kind you're used to." Lieutenant Kavor examined the equipment, his fungal patches swirling with curiosity. "These are just pieces of metal and fiber. Where are the anti-gravity units? The safety fields?" "When those fail, these don't," Chen replied, expertly attaching a harness to herself. "And they will fail. The canyon's magnetic composition plays havoc with advanced tech. That's why we chose it." As if on cue, the remaining systems in their environmental suits flickered and died. Raxtalia watched as her team's expressions shifted from panic to resignation to determination. They were learning. First lesson of canyon survival, Rodriguez demonstrated as he secured a rope, is to trust your body's natural abilities. Your species didn't evolve with anti-grav units. You evolved with something better. The descent into the canyon was a masterclass in rediscovering ancient instincts. The humans showed them how each species' natural adaptations made them uniquely suited for different aspects of climbing. Raxtalia's scales could grip the rock like millions of tiny hooks. Zixtal's crystalline form could create perfect handholds by partially melting and reforming against the stone. Kavor's fungal patches could sense structural weaknesses in the rock face. "That's it," Chen encouraged as they navigated a particularly treacherous section. "Stop fighting your instincts. Your bodies know what to do." Halfway through the canyon, disaster struck. A loose rock gave way under Lieutenant Kavor, sending him plummeting toward the canyon floor. Without thinking, Raxtalia's tail whipped out, wrapping around the outcropping while her claws caught Kavor's harness. Zixtal instantly crystallized between two rocks, creating an anchor point. "Perfect," Rodriguez called out, making no move to help. "Natural reactions. Perfect teamwork. That's what we've been trying to teach you." As they pulled Kavor to safety, Raxtalia realized something profound. The humans weren't teaching them new skills. They were teaching them to trust abilities they'd always had. "The canyon's about to show us why they call it Dead Man's," Chen announced as they approached a narrow passage. The wind howled through the rocks, creating an eerie whistling sound. The pressure changes here can crush a dropship, but your bodies can handle it if you let them. What followed was the most intense test of their newfound abilities yet. The wind tried to tear them from the walls while pressure changes made their ears pop and bones creak. But each officer found their own way to adapt. Rax Talia's scales flattened and overlapped in new patterns. Zixtal's crystalline form developed microscopic chambers to equalize pressure. Kavor's fungal patches created air pockets that actually helped stabilize the entire team. This is why humans are so dangerous, Chen explained during a brief rest. We never forgot that our bodies are the most advanced survival tools ever created. Evolution spent billions of years perfecting these systems. Technology is just a bonus. As they neared the canyon's end, a massive shadow passed overhead. Everyone looked up to see a military dropship, its engines struggling against the canyon's magnetic interference. That's our extraction, Rodriguez grinned. But here's the real test. Are you going to take it? Rax Talia looked at her team. 3 days ago, they would have scrambled for the ship without hesitation. Now she saw the same determination in their eyes that she felt in her bones. No, she replied, her scales shifting to the deep purple of absolute certainty. We finish this on our own terms. Chen's smile was fierce with approval. Now you're thinking like survivors. Come on. The worst part of the canyon is still ahead, and there's a sandstorm brewing. Time to show us what you've really learned. As they continued their climb, Rax Talia understood that the real challenge wasn't surviving the canyon. It was surviving the death of their preconceptions about themselves, their capabilities, and the supposedly primitive species that was teaching them to be truly advanced. The dropship disappeared into the distance, its mechanical drone fading away until all that remained was the wind, the rocks, and the sound of 6 beings rediscovering what it meant to be truly alive. The first sign of trouble came with the wind change. Rax Talia's scales detected the shift before anyone saw it. Hot, dry air carrying the acrid scent of smoke. Through the darkening sky, an orange glow painted the horizon. Wildfire, Cadet Commander Chen announced, her voice carrying an edge Rax Talia hadn't heard before. And it's moving fast. This isn't part of the training program. Commander Zixtal's crystalline form pulsed with anxiety. Our emergency beacons are still dead, Rodriguez cut in, already pulling equipment from his pack. And the magnetic interference in this canyon means no rescue ships can reach us. We got about 30 minutes before that fire cuts off our escape route. Lieutenant Kavor's fungal patches darkened. Fire, the one thing our species never evolved to handle. Our worlds were too wet, too cold, or too regulated. Then it's time for the ultimate lesson, Chen declared, her eyes reflecting the approaching inferno. How to survive something your species never had to face. The humans moved with practiced precision, outlining a plan that seemed insane to their alien students. They weren't going to run from the fire. They were going to use it. Fire creates its own weather system, Rodriguez explained while demonstrating how to create what he called a fire break. It pulls in oxygen, creates wind patterns. If you understand how it thinks, you can predict where it's going. Thinks. Zixtal vibrated with disbelief. Fire doesn't think. Everything on a Deathworld thinks. Chen corrected, showing them how to clear vegetation. The storms think. The canyon thinks. The fire thinks. That's why we survived here. We learned to think back. The next 20 minutes were a blur of activity. The humans taught them to read the fire's behavior, to understand its hunger for fuel and oxygen. Each alien officer found their natural abilities becoming crucial to survival. Rax Talia's heat-resistant scales made her perfect for clearing the hottest zones. Zixtal's crystalline form could reflect intense heat, creating safe passages. Kavor's fungal patches could detect subtle air pressure changes, predicting the fire's movement. The fire's creating a vacuum. Chen shouted over the roar of approaching flames. It'll try to pull us in. That's what we want. Want? Kavor's translator barely picked up his shocked response. Trust us, Rodriguez was already positioning the team. When I give the signal, run toward the burned area behind the main fire front. The ground will be hot, but there's no fuel left for the fire there. The inferno reached the canyon walls, climbing them like a living thing. The heat was beyond anything their environmental suits could have handled, but their natural adaptations held. Raxtalia watched in amazement as her scales developed new patterns to deflect the thermal radiation. Now, Chen's command cut through the fire's roar. They ran, not away from the fire, but through it. The humans had positioned them perfectly in a gap where the flames had already consumed everything and moved on. The ground smoldered under their feet, but they were alive. Keep moving. Rodriguez urged them forward. The fire's not done thinking yet. He was right. The inferno seemed to realize it had lost its prey. The winds shifted, trying to circle back. But now the alien officers understood. This wasn't just survival. It was a conversation with the elements themselves. The fire's creating its own storm, Raxtalia observed, her scales reading the temperature patterns. If we time it right. Now you're thinking like a Deathworlder. Chen grinned, her face streaked with soot. The fire's storm can lift us out of the canyon. What followed was the most incredible display of human ingenuity yet. Using makeshift thermal wings crafted from their remaining emergency blankets, they rode the fire's updraft out of the canyon. Each alien officer used their natural abilities to stabilize their flight. Zixtal's crystalline reflections, Kevor's air pressure sensing, Raxtalia's scale configurations, they landed safely beyond the fire's reach, watching as the inferno consumed the canyon they just escaped. The humans hadn't just helped them survive. They taught them to dance with death itself. That, Chen announced, her voice filled with pride, is why humans are the best survival instructors in the galaxy. Not because we're stronger or smarter, but because we never stop talking to our world, even when it tries to kill us. Raxtalia looked at her team. Their bodies were smoke-stained and exhausted, but their eyes held a new light, the light of understanding. They had faced something their species had never evolved to handle, and they had survived by learning to think like humans. Tomorrow's the final test, Rodriguez said, checking his primitive timepiece. But after surviving this, I'd say you're ready. As they made camp for the night, Raxtalia realized the humans had given them something far more valuable than survival training. They had taught them to rewrite the limitations their species had placed on themselves. The fire continued to burn in the distance, a reminder that on a Deathworld, every moment of survival was a conversation with death itself. And humans, somehow, had learned to make death listen. The final test began with a lie. Your extraction point is 10 miles north, Cadet Commander Chen announced at dawn, her expression unreadable. Simple navigation exercise. Get there before sundown, and you graduate. Raxtalia's scales shifted to a pattern she'd developed during their training, one that indicated skepticism. After everything they'd learned, nothing was ever simple. The other officers noticed too. Zixtal's crystalline form vibrating at alert frequencies, Kevor's fungal patches swirling with anticipation. You're not coming with us, Raxtalia stated. It wasn't a question. Nope. Rodriguez grinned. Time to show us what you've learned. Or haven't. As the humans disappeared into the desert haze, Commander Zixtal's crystalline form caught the early sunlight. The wind patterns are wrong, he announced, using his newly discovered ability to read air currents through light refraction. There's something massive approaching from the west. The biggest dust storm of the season, Kevor confirmed, his fungal patches detecting the atmospheric pressure changes. They knew it was coming. Of course they did. Raxtalia smiled, her scales already adapting to the approaching storm. Because this isn't a test of navigation. It's a test of everything. They moved across the desert landscape with newfound confidence, each using their natural abilities in ways that would have seemed impossible a week ago. The extraction point was a trap, too obvious, too exposed. The real challenge was reading the environment the way their human teachers had shown them. The storm hit with apocalyptic force, turning day into night. Sand particles capable of stripping paint from metal scoured the landscape. But where their environmental suits would have failed, their bodies adapted. Raxtelia's scales locked into overlapping patterns, creating perfect protection. Zixtal's crystalline form developed microscopic matrices that filtered the air. Kavor's fungal patches generated protective spores that helped shield the entire team. "The humans aren't testing our survival skills," Raxtelia shouted over the howling wind. "They're testing whether we understand why they teach the way they do." Through the storm, they spotted other training groups, alien officers who had taken the obvious route to the extraction point. Their technology was failing, their panic visible even through the curtain of sand. Without discussion, Raxtelia's team changed course. They weren't going to abandon others to the storm. That wasn't the human way. Using everything they'd learned, they began guiding the struggling officers to safety. Raxtelia taught them how to let their bodies adapt. Zixtal showed them how to read the storm's patterns through their natural senses. Kavor demonstrated how to work with the environment instead of fighting it. There, through the maelstrom, Kavor's enhanced senses detected a familiar signal. Not the extraction point, but something better: the human cadets waiting in a hidden canyon. They found Chen and Rodriguez setting up an emergency shelter, their expressions breaking into proud grins as Raxtelia's team arrived with the rescued officers. "Now that," Chen announced over the storm's roar, "is what we call passing with honors." "You knew we'd go back for them," Raxtelia realized. "We hoped," Rodriguez corrected. "That's the real lesson we've been teaching. Technology can fail. Bodies can fail. But the decision to help others survive, that's what makes any species truly advanced." As they secured the shelter against the storm's fury, Chen gathered everyone around. "You came here thinking humans were primitive because we still rely on our natural abilities. But that's exactly what makes us dangerous. We never forgot that the most advanced technology in the universe is the one evolution spent billions of years perfecting. Our bodies," Zixtal's crystalline form pulsed with understanding. "Our instincts," Kavor added, his fungal patches glowing with newfound confidence. "Our will to survive," Raxtelia finished, her scales shifting to a completely new pattern, one that combined all the survival adaptations she developed. The storm raged through the night, but inside the shelter, something remarkable was happening. Alien officers who had arrived believing in the supremacy of their technology were teaching each other how to use their natural abilities. Species that had evolved on different worlds were sharing survival techniques that transcended their biological differences. "So, Senior Inspector," Chen asked as the storm began to fade, "what will your report to the Council say?" Raxtelia looked at her team, at the officers they'd rescued, at the bonds formed through shared survival. Her scales shifted to a color she'd never used before, one that represented a profound transformation of understanding. "The truth," she replied. "That humans aren't primitive Deathworlders teaching survival. They're the guardians of something we all forgot, the power of our own evolution. And maybe, just maybe, they're the most advanced species of all." Dawn broke over Death Valley one final time, revealing a landscape transformed by the storm. But the real transformation had happened within each officer. They had arrived as products of their advanced civilizations. They were leaving as something more. Beings who had rediscovered their connection to the universe itself, taught by the species they had once dismissed as primitive. As their extraction shuttle finally appeared on the horizon, Raxtelia knew the Council would never see humans the same way again. These primitive Deathworlders had proven themselves to be the greatest teachers in the galaxy, not because they could survive anything, but because they could teach others to do the same. The age of purely technological advancement was over. The age of rediscovery had begun.